Hey everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions, and this week's first question comes from G. Skowal. I hope that I'm pronouncing that right. G.S. Kowal. I have no idea how to pronounce your username, and I feel bad because you comment on my stuff a lot. So correct me if I got it wrong, which I'm pretty certain that I did. Anyway, Steve, I don't know if this question has been asked before, but what is your favorite movie genre? And since you are also into writing screenplays, what genre do you feel the most comfortable writing in? Oh, I love a good black comedy. I love a really dark black comedy. The blacker the better. That's one of the reasons why I love the Coen brothers so much. They have made some really excellent black comedies. And Paul Thomas Anderson as well, a great filmmaker whose work is often misinterpreted as something other than black comedy, when in fact a lot of his stuff I would argue is black comedy. Yeah, and black comedy is probably one of my favorite things to write too, although I'm not as comfortable in it. I just don't think I'm good enough at it to be completely comfortable in the genre. But you know, writing. I like writing comedy. I like writing comedy of uncomfortable pauses. You know, the comedy of humiliation, the comedy of discomfort, like The Office, the Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant original Office. That's and Extras and other stuff that they've done. That to me is just so funny and so much fun to write. And because not only is it funny in a way that I really appreciate, but it allows me to do things that I think I'm good at as a writer, like writing conversations, like examining and kind of poking fun at human behavior. So that's what I would say. Poor Cicero, is morality objective or subjective? I would say ultimately morality is subjective. And the reason I say ultimately is because depending on whatever your scale is, or what your perspective is, it can be seen as objective. For instance, I would argue, I think you could argue, that from the point of view of an individual, morality is objective because you don't, or at least most people don't, define their own morality for themselves. They are taking moral principles, moral lessons, etc., hewing to the moral standards of their society, which is determined by their culture, by the moral consensus. So in that sense, morality is objective. From my point of view, I would argue that morality is objective. I don't decide what is right and wrong for myself. I participate in a wider cultural conversation about morality, but I don't get to decide what is right and wrong on my own authority. But from the view of humanity itself, morality is subjective, because we as a species, we decide what we think is right and wrong. And the nice thing about looking at it that way is, even if you believe that morality comes from God, you still would have to say that morality is subjective from the perspective of God. Because if God is making up the rules, then morality to him is subjective. It would be objective to us, but to him it's still subjective. So if you believe in a God that makes the moral rules, then you believe that morality is ultimately subjective. There's no way around it. The only way I can see of arguing for true objective morality is to argue that moral standards just exist, free from anything else. They exist just like laws of physics. And then they are objective. Then things are simply right or wrong because of these pre-existing standards, not because of God, not because of us, not because of anything. But most religious people who make moral arguments will argue that God is the source of morality. And if that's the case, then there is no objective morality. There is subjective morality that applies to us, and from our point of view would be objective. Bagser1, have you ever seen Chikara Pro Wrestling? If so, what is your opinion of it? Do you think it's a bit of fun, or do you look down on it like many serious wrestling fans do? I've seen a bit of Chikara, and I guess what I would say about it is it's not exactly my cup of tea. It's not something that I would watch regularly, but I certainly don't look down on it. I think that serious wrestling fans who look down on Chikara are kind of missing the point of being a wrestling fan. I think when you decide for yourself that you are a serious wrestling fan, I think you sort of lose the right to look down on things. I think that's part of being a serious wrestling fan, is being able to admit that what you are serious about is so silly and so low in so many ways that you kind of, like, a wrestling snob to me just makes no sense at all. How can you be a snob about pro wrestling? Steve, do you ever think there will be world peace? And that's from Jaybird196. Yeah, I think there will be world peace when the Vulcan ship lands and they make first contact. I think that will spur us toward world peace. As much as an optimist as I am, I can't quite bring myself to say that I think there will ever be true world peace. Although I think that the world will continue to get more peaceful as we go along. I am that optimistic, but I think it's sort of like approaching an infinity. Like, I don't think we'll ever quite get there. It's like approaching the speed of light. You're never going to quite make it. You're always going to have a little bit more to go. But if you look at the arc of history, I mean, clearly the world, in the broad sense, the world has become more peaceful the more time has passed. I mean, look, 200 years ago, the United States and Great Britain were enemies. Now we are great allies. Throughout most of modern history, the great powers of old Europe, England and France and Spain, were constantly at each other's throats. We're constantly at war. Now they are all great allies. Now most of Europe, Western Europe, is allied in a European Union. Who would have thought that would ever happen 150, 200 years ago, even 75 years ago or so? I mean, it's really astonishing when you look at how much more peaceful the world has become, and how we have been able to form incredibly strong, mutually beneficial alliances between powers that relatively recently were trying to wipe each other off the map. Germany and France and the United States and Japan, and it's really very encouraging. So I think we're going to continue that move toward peace, but I don't know if we'll ever really get there to where the world is completely united and completely peaceful. That's probably the least realistic aspect of Star Trek to me. To bring it back around to the Vulcan thing. I think traveling faster than the speed of light, all the aliens looking like us, just with some shit on their faces, that is more realistic to me than United World, Peaceful Earth, unfortunately. Bud Moore, what are your feelings on the topic of legalization of marijuana? If it is made legal for recreational use, would you consider trying it? Just curious. I don't judge, man. I respect your decisions. I respect you. You're a fellow atheist liberal who shows extremely good common sense. You're quite articulate as well. Being an English major, I would expect that. Well, thank you, Bud. That's very nice of you to say. I appreciate that. If it were legalized for recreational use, I still would probably not try it, because my not trying it has nothing to do with whether or not it's legal or not. I know enough people that smoke pot that if I wanted to try some, I very easily could pretty much anytime I wanted, and I just don't want to. But I do think it should be legalized. My philosophy with marijuana, and again, like as I mentioned in a previous Riffing on Mail Call video, when someone asked about changing the name of the Washington Redskins to something less racially insensitive, I said about that it doesn't really keep me up at night. And the same thing with marijuana legalization. It's not something that really I feel strongly about, but I do think it should be legalized. And I mean, I don't see the point of arresting people and putting people in jail for buying weed to get high with themselves. I just don't see the sense in that. And I think it should be legalized, and I think we should tax the shit out of it. That is my position. To treat it like alcohol, to treat it like tobacco. Legalize it, regulate it, make sure it's safe, and tax the shit out of it. That is my legalization on marijuana position. Here's one from Bassbait. Here's a question. What do you consider to be pretentious in the major art forms? Film, music, painting, writing, whatever other art forms you care to include. And who do you consider to be pretentious in those same various art forms? I consider it to be pretentious when an artist, whatever art form they work in, does things self-consciously to be arty or to be avant-garde or intending to be vague and remote and confusing and opaque, that sort of thing, I find pretentious. Or like, for instance, if you're a filmmaker who is more interested in being self-indulgent with the visuals and the style than in telling the story or serving the characters or something like that, that's what I would consider to be pretentious. And as far as individuals, I don't know. The only art form I feel like I know enough about to be able to comment like this is film. And of filmmakers that I consider to be pretentious, probably Baz Luhrmann is a huge one. I think Baz Luhrmann is an incredibly pretentious filmmaker. Who else? Lars von Trier is hugely pretentious, but I also think he's incredibly talented. I'm not a fan of Baz Luhrmann at all, but I am a huge fan of Lars von Trier. But he is incredibly pretentious, a hugely pretentious filmmaker. And that just goes to show pretentiousness isn't always the last nail in the coffin. There are incredibly talented filmmakers that are arguably also incredibly pretentious filmmakers. Paul Thomas Anderson, I mentioned earlier in the answer about favorite film genres. He can be incredibly pretentious. He's also one of my very favorite filmmakers. Same thing for David Lynch. There may not be a more pretentious filmmaker in our popular culture than David Lynch. And he's also a great filmmaker, makes incredibly interesting, compelling films. Pretentious as hell. Robert Fuller, have you ever looked for an atheist community in your area or found the atheist whose call you read in this video? Have you ever been recognized around town for your videos, specifically the Riffing on Male Cause series? Do you ever attend atheist conventions other than the Reason Rally? I ask for two reasons. I'm genuinely curious about your opinion of them, and I wanted an excuse to shamelessly plug Apostacon in Omaha, September 20 through 22nd. Well, consider Apostacon in Omaha on September 20 through 22nd shamelessly plugged. Everybody who's in Omaha should go to Apostacon on September 20th through 22nd. I don't seek out conventions. I went to the Reason Rally because it was happening less than an hour from where I live, and it was just a huge deal. And there were people that were going there that I wanted to meet from YouTube. And it just sounded like, you know, I got to see Richard Dawkins speak live. I got to see James Randi. I got to see all of these just remarkable people. Greta Christina, it goes on and on and on, just all the speakers. And it was just a great time and a great event, and so it felt so wonderful to be a part of that crowd and to be a part of that happening. But in general, I'm not much of a joiner. I mean, if I were invited to a group or if I were invited to appear someplace, I probably would, but I'm not like someone who's going to show up at regular meetings, and you know, it just doesn't appeal to me. Not that there's anything wrong with it at all if it does appeal to you. It just doesn't appeal to me. It's just not something that I feel like I am missing or that I have to seek out. And I have only been recognized around town, I think once, and that was by J-Law, Jamie Lawrence, who has a YouTube channel here, Rebellious Records, and hosts a local radio show, and is a really cool guy and a really funny guy, and he recognized me in the parking lot of a grocery store last year. But I think he's the only one who has actually recognized me, like when I've been out and about from this area. I get the impression that there are only a really small number of people in this area who are aware of me. I know there may be 10, maybe a dozen people that I know of, other than my close personal friends, who are aware of my work. Which, I mean, I don't have a huge problem with. I don't really care where the views come from, you know, as long as they're there. And finally, for the last question this week, something special. Stimuli made my whole week by asking me the Inside the Actors Studio version of the Bernard Pivot Marcel Proust questionnaire. This is the version that has been used to end every episode of Inside the Actors Studio. And Stimuli asked me these questions. So I'm now going to answer these questions as if I were a guest on Inside the Actors Studio. And you will have to pardon me, I will not be doing a James Lipton impersonation. I probably could, but I'm not gonna cheapen this. Okay, so here we go. Dear Steve, I suppose this was inevitable given your affinity for film, but here goes. What is your favorite word? My favorite word is actually a curse word, so I will save it for later in the list, but my favorite non-curse word is Haloanaka, and it is a native Hawaiian word referring to the taro plant, which in the native Hawaiian creation myth was actually the dead brother of humanity that grew into the taro plant. And I just love the way the word sounds, Haloanaka. It sounds so pleasing and it feels so good to say. That's my favorite word. What is your least favorite word? In the context of a person or a child, my least favorite word is illegitimate. I think that's one of the ugliest words in the English language. To refer to a person born out of wedlock as illegitimate. It's really distasteful to me. What turns you on? Intelligence, self-expression, things like that. Engagement, conversation. What turns you off? Willful ignorance, people who are unwilling to learn or unwilling to admit that they might be wrong. What is your favorite curse word? What else could it be but fuck? The greatest word ever invented. By far my favorite word. Incredibly versatile, incredibly useful, and it just feels so fucking good to say. What sound or noise do you love? I love the sound of an approaching train and an onrushing train. I love train sounds in general. I love the whistles. I love the pounding of the wheels along the tracks. I love everything about the sound of trains. I love the hum that you hear when you're riding on the inside of a train. Train sounds. What sound or noise do you hate? The sound of the air bleeding out of air brakes on big trucks. This just really loud hiss, this powerful hissing rush of air. It is absolutely repellent to me. And the sound of motorcycles, especially on a nice day. I absolutely loathe the sound of motorcycles and loud cars in general, just all of that stuff. Loud motor vehicle noises I absolutely hate. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt? At my very best, and given the best possible circumstances, I think I would like to attempt being a teacher. What profession would you not like to do? Well, if I'm going to be a teacher at my best self, teaching is probably the most important and most useful profession. So I would not like to attempt the opposite of teaching, the least important, least useful profession, which would be to be a priest or a minister, or a cleric, a clergyman, a pastor, anything like that. The ministry, the most useless profession ever devised. And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates? I would like to hear God say, don't worry, it's nothing like the Christians told you it was. because if it's anything like that, I don't want to go in. So there you go. Those are my answers to the Bernard Pivot, James Lipton, Marcel Proust, Inside the Actor Studio questionnaire. Thank you, Stimuli, so much for asking me that. I've always wanted to answer those questions, and that was just a lot of fun. I'm so happy that you literally made my whole week asking me that, so thanks a lot, Stim. Let's do a shout-out before we get out of here. The shout-out this week goes to The Profound Atheist. The Profound Atheist has a relatively young channel, just opened, I think, in January. There are only 5 videos on there right now. But The Profound Atheist, he has a really strong presentation, a really good voice, a really good focus, not just on religion and atheism, but on science. And 2 of the few videos he has up right now, 2 of the 5 videos have to do with space exploration, with science, and there's no better way to get on my good side than to talk some cool science shit. So The Profound Atheist is the shout out this week. Go check out his channel. He only has a few hundred subscribers at this point and a few videos, so maybe with some encouragement and some support, he'll make a few more videos, because he has a knack for it, and it's an interesting channel just in the fledgling state that it's in, and I would definitely like to see more from The Profound Atheist, so go check out that channel. That is it for this week. I am done for another week. Thank you guys for watching so much. As always, if you want to have your question answered on the next episode, please leave a comment with your question, because I can only do this if you ask. In order for me to do, you had to ask. You have to ask. So please leave a comment on this video with your question that you would like me to address in the next video, and I will address as many of them as I can Once again, I always get more questions than I can use, which I appreciate. That's a good thing. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for participating. Thank you for all the support that you've given me. And I love to do this. I'm glad that you enjoy watching it. And I will see you to do this again next week. Thanks for watching.